When you pull her in, there's a shift. It's not just your arms around her. It's her walls coming down. Vulnerability in its purest form. She lets go of the things she's been holding on to. The day's worries, the silent struggles, the hidden insecurities, everything melts away for that moment. She no longer has to be strong, to keep up appearances, to play a role. All that's left is her, the real her, the person who needs a break from the weight of the world. And she finds herself surrendering to it, to you, to the comfort of your touch. The world outside has a way of making her feel like she has to carry the weight of everything on her own shoulders. She has to be the best at work, the perfect friend, the ideal partner, the perfect daughter, the ever-present caregiver. She's been playing so many roles that she sometimes forgets who she really is under all the layers of responsibility and expectation. But in your embrace, she doesn't have to play a part. She doesn't have to pretend. She doesn't have to be perfect. For once, she can just breathe. In your arms, she allows herself to feel the relief of not having to be anything other than what she is, tired, vulnerable, and human. The facade she wears in the outside world slowly begins to melt away, piece by piece. She doesn't have to be strong in this moment. She doesn't have to keep up the appearances of having it all together. Instead, she finds herself leaning into your warmth, surrendering to the comfort that only your presence can provide. She doesn't have to explain herself. She doesn't have to be anything more than who she is right now. And in that surrender, there's a kind of healing. A gentle, unspoken healing that can't be fixed with words or advice, but with the simple act of being held. She's not asking for you to solve anything. In fact, she may not even have the words to explain what she's feeling. It's not that she wants you to fix her or solve the problems she carries. What she really needs, more than anything, is for you to just hold her, to be there in the stillness. It's in the absence of words that she finds a kind of peace. Peace in knowing that she's not alone in this moment. Peace in feeling the steady rhythm of your breathing, the steady presence of your body. It's not about the solutions you may offer or the advice you might give. It's about the shared silence and the deep sense of comfort that comes from knowing she's safe with you. In that embrace, she feels something almost sacred. The permission to let go, to rest, to trust. It's not just about physical comfort, it's emotional respite. The worries that plague her mind, the doubts, the fears, the insecurities can, for a moment, be set aside. They don't vanish completely, but in this space, they're momentarily held at bay. Her heart can relax, knowing that for this one fleeting moment, she doesn't have to carry it all. You've created a space where she can just exist without fear of judgment, without the pressure of expectation. Her vulnerability in that moment is not a sign of weakness, but of trust. It takes an immense amount of courage to show the parts of yourself that are not always visible, the parts that are fragile, scared, unsure. But she allows you to see these parts because she trusts you, not just with her heart, but with her soul. She trusts that in your arms, there's no need to hide. She trusts that your love will not be shaken by the raw, unguarded pieces of her that she often keeps hidden from the world. And that's the quiet power of your embrace. It's not just physical, it's emotional. It's the space she can retreat to when the world feels too much. It's the reminder that she doesn't have to carry everything on her own, that it's okay to lean on someone, to rest, to let go. In that moment, she finds the strength to be soft, to surrender, to let herself be vulnerable because she knows you will hold her through it all. The weight of the world can feel a little lighter when she's wrapped in your arms, and for once, she doesn't have to carry it alone. The betrayal hit me like a bolt of lightning, unforgiving, cold, and cruel. My son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into our family, trusted like a son, and watched marry my daughter, had just locked me inside a cabin he had deliberately set on fire. The flames were rising around me, each crackling hiss like the universe itself conspiring against my survival. I couldn't understand it at first. Why would he do this? What had possessed him to lock me away, to watch as the fire slowly consumed everything in its path? And for what? For a fortune, a $5 billion fortune, one that could change the course of his life, my daughter's life, and countless others who would never see it coming. He had the audacity to think he could steal it, and that my life would simply be a casualty of his greed. I remember the moment so clearly, like it happened in slow motion. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were not the eyes of the man I had thought I knew. He was smiling, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who thought he was untouchable, someone who believed he had already won. "It's the only way," he had said, his voice level and unwavering, a calmness in his demeanor that made my blood run cold. But behind that calm, there was something sinister, a glint of satisfaction that I couldn't ignore. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't just some inconvenience. I was a problem he needed to eliminate, just another obstacle standing between him and a fortune beyond imagination. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked into place, and I heard him walking away, each step echoing in the silence. I was left alone in that cabin, the faint smell of smoke already beginning to mix with the cold, stale air. I felt the heat start to rise almost immediately. The fire had been set. I could already tell by the way it crept along the wooden beams, devouring the oxygen. The flames would grow quickly, and the thick smoke would soon fill the cabin, suffocating anyone trapped inside. As the reality set in, the sense of panic threatened to overtake me. I was about to die, trapped in a burning cabin with no one to help. But then something inside me shifted. It was as if my mind went into overdrive. I wasn't going to die like this, not at his hands, not in a fire he had set with his own malice. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. There had to be a way out. I wasn't just going to burn up like some forgotten soul. There was too much at stake, my family, my daughter, the life we had built. My mind began to race, thinking through every possibility. I could feel the heat intensifying around me, each breath making the smoke thicker. The fire was advancing quickly, but I couldn't just wait to be consumed by it. I needed a plan. I stumbled through the cabin, my eyes watering from the smoke. Every surface seemed to be turning black, the flames creeping closer, inching toward me. As I moved through the room, I happened to bump into something cold and metallic. My fingers brushed against it, and I realized what it was, a safe hidden away in the corner of the room. A heavy-duty, fireproof safe. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a random piece of furniture. It was deliberate. He had hidden something inside it, something important. Maybe it was his money, his illicit money, the money he planned to steal and run away with. I didn't hesitate. I knew what I had to do. The fire was consuming the cabin around me, but this safe, this last shred of hope, could be the key to everything. I was breathing heavily, my lungs burning from the thick smoke, but I didn't stop. I worked quickly, my hands shaking from fear and exhaustion, but my mind sharp, focused on the task at hand. I could feel the heat beginning to scorch my skin, and the thick, suffocating smoke made every breath feel like a battle. I turned the dial of the safe with urgency, my fingers slipping from the sweat, but I couldn't afford to stop now. I had to get it open. Then it happened, the satisfying click of the lock releasing. The safe opened with a hiss, the sound of it breaking free like a breath of fresh air. Inside, it was exactly as I expected. Bundles of cash, a few encrypted documents, and what appeared to be a set of bank statements. But as I pulled the papers out, I realized something else. This wasn't just money. The documents contained everything. Proof of my son-in-law's dealings, the criminal network he was tied to, the exact plans for how he was going to make his escape with the money, and more importantly, his plan to frame me for his crimes ***. This was no longer just about greed. This was about destruction. He had set the fire to make sure I was blamed for everything, to cover his tracks, and to ensure that no one would ever suspect him. As the cabin around me burned, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger, of righteous fury. This was bigger than just survival. This was about justice. It was about showing him that no matter how hard he tried to burn me, no matter how much he thought he could escape, truth would always have a way of surviving. And so, despite the flames, despite the suffocating smoke, I grabbed the papers and stuffed them into my jacket. My hands were blistered from the heat, But I didn't care. I didn't need to think about what would happen to me next. What mattered was what I was going to do, with the truth I held in my hands. The fire raged on as I found my way toward the back of the cabin, my body shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was locked, but I didn't need to use the door. I found a window in the back, and with every ounce of strength left in my body, I broke through it, the glass shattering as I tumbled out onto the ground, the cool night air filling my lungs for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't stop. I ran. I had no idea where I was going, but I wasn't going to wait around for him to come back and finish me off. By the time they returned, expecting to find my charred remains, they were greeted with something they never could have imagined. There I was, standing tall in front of them, covered in ash and dirt but alive. The fire had burned, but I had survived, and I held the evidence that would expose everything. The expression on my son-in-law's face was priceless. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I wasn't dead. I wasn't his victim. He tried to laugh it off, to play it cool, but the evidence in my hand told a different story. The truth was undeniable. And as they tried to backpedal, to explain their way out of it, I didn't flinch. The law was on its way, and my survival wasn't just a triumph over the fire. It was a triumph over betrayal, over deceit, over everything he thought he could get away with. The papers in my hands were all the proof I needed, and as the authorities took him away, I knew that justice was finally going to be served. The flames began to roar as the fire took hold of the cabin with an almost vicious intensity. The air was thick with smoke, so dense that each breath felt like inhaling molten ash. I could hear the crackling of the burning wood, the high-pitched whistle of the fire as it tore through the timber, devouring everything in its path. The heat was unbearable, but I forced myself to focus. I couldn't afford a panic, not now, not when my life was hanging by a thread. The cabin was a death trap, and my son-in-law had locked me inside it, thinking that he could just walk away with $5 billion, his ill-gotten fortune, and leave me to burn with no one the wiser. But what he hadn't realized was that I wasn't just a helpless victim. I wasn't going to go down without a fight. The fire raged louder, and every minute felt like an eternity. The walls around me seemed to tremble, as though they were alive, their crackling and groaning the soundtrack to my desperation. My throat burned with every breath, my eyes stung from the smoke, and my skin felt like it was being scorched with every passing second. Yet, even in the midst of the chaos, my mind remained sharp. I could hear the fire grow louder, but I drowned it out, focusing on one singular thought: survival. The cabin was starting to collapse in on itself. I could see the beams above me buckling under the weight of the flames, the floorboards beginning to warp and bend with the heat. If I didn't get out soon, I would be trapped. But there had to be some way to escape. That's when I noticed it, tucked away in the far corner of the room, half hidden beneath a pile of old furniture. A safe. I don't know why I noticed it then. Maybe it was the way it seemed untouched by the chaos around it, its cold, solid metal mocking me as the flames closed in. I stumbled toward it, my legs weak from the heat and the growing dizziness that the smoke was causing. My hands were trembling, but I reached for the dial anyway, my fingers clumsy and unsteady. Every second that ticked by felt like a death sentence. I could feel the fire creeping closer, its warmth too close for comfort, and the thick smoke made every breath feel like a battle. I forced myself to calm down. There was no time for fear. I had to open the safe. I had to find whatever was inside, because whatever it was, it could be the only thing that could save me now. The dial on the safe was heavy, stiff with years of dust and neglect, but I didn't care. I twisted it, the metal grinding against my fingers, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to get it open. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart hammering in my chest as the fire consumed the space around me. But then, with a faint click, the lock on the safe released. I barely had a moment to feel relief before I opened the door. Inside the safe was a mess of papers, documents stacked on top of each other, yellowed and brittle from years of neglect. But among the piles of paper, something caught my eye. There were bank statements, contracts, and a set of encrypted files. But what stood out the most was a set of names and connections, names I didn't recognize, but ones that seemed strangely familiar. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. This wasn't just money. This was bigger. This was about power, control, and betrayal. As I skimmed through the papers, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. My son-in-law had been planning this for months. No, for years. He wasn't just after the money. He was tied to a network of criminals. He had set this entire thing up, knowing full well that he could burn me and cover his tracks. He thought the fire would take me out, leaving him free to walk away with everything. But what he didn't count on was me. I wasn't just some victim waiting to be forgotten. My hands shook as I stuffed the papers into my jacket, the weight of what I held in my hands heavier than any amount of money. I couldn't waste any more time. I had to get out. The flames were growing stronger, the heat unbearable now. The air was thick with smoke, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. But there was no stopping now. I had already survived the worst of it, and I wasn't going to let this fire take me without a fight. I turned my attention to the door, but it was locked, the heavy wood trapping me inside. The windows were sealed tight, and I couldn't break through the walls. But then, something inside me snapped. I remembered the small back window, the one I had barely noticed when I first entered. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance. I staggered toward it, my body aching, my breath shallow from the smoke. The fire was closing in, and I could feel the heat on my skin, but I didn't hesitate. I had to make it. With a burst of adrenaline, I reached the window and kicked at the frame. It splintered under the pressure, shards of glass flying in every direction. I climbed through, the rough edges cutting at my skin, but I didn't stop. I pushed myself out, ignoring the pain as the cold air rushed in, filling my lungs with relief. I had made it out. I was alive. I didn't stop to look back at the burning cabin, didn't stop to think about what might have happened if I hadn't made it. All that mattered was that I had the proof in my hands. I had survived, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I ran, stumbling through the trees, my body bruised and battered, but I didn't care. The papers in my jacket were all the evidence I needed. By the time they returned, expecting to find nothing but charred remains, they were greeted with an impossible sight. There I stood, covered in soot and dirt, but alive. My son-in-law's face drained of color as he saw me, standing there, the documents in my hands. He tried to smile, to brush it off, but it was too late. The truth was already in motion. The evidence was irrefutable. And now, he had no choice but to face what he had done. He tried to explain, to deny everything, but I didn't need to say a word. The papers spoke for themselves. The law would handle the rest. He thought he could burn me, destroy everything I had built, but he had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. And that mistake would cost him everything. As the fire crackled louder, a low rumble that seemed to echo through my bones, I could feel my pulse quicken, but my thoughts were clear. The suffocating smoke filled the air, and each breath burned like fire itself, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to die in this cabin. Not like this. Not because of his betrayal. I had made it this far, and I would keep fighting until my last breath. I stumbled through the cabin, the flames now dancing wildly, hungry and relentless, threatening to consume everything in their path. The heat was unbearable, searing my skin as if the fire itself was mocking me. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the very air was pressing down on me, choking me with its thickness. The beams above me groaned and cracked, the wood warping under the intense heat. The smell of burning timber and the acrid sting of smoke made my eyes water. But through it all, I was still focused on survival. I would not let this be the end. I needed to think. I needed to act fast. In the midst of the chaos, I searched the cabin with frantic eyes, looking for anything that could help me, anything that could be my salvation. Then I saw it, tucked away in the corner, half hidden behind a pile of discarded furniture. A safe. My heart skipped a beat. The safe wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a lifeline. I knew it the moment I saw it. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. The very thing he had used to lock away the key to his $5 billion fortune might just be the very thing that would bring him down. The fire roared around me, but it didn't matter. The safe was my focus now. I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to make sure the truth came out. I rushed toward it, my legs unsteady from the smoke and the oppressive heat. Each breath I took felt like it was burning through my lungs. The sweat dripped down my forehead, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered except opening that safe. I couldn't afford to waste time. I knew the fire was already claiming the cabin, slowly but surely, but I had to get to the safe first. The dial was cold and stiff under my fingertips, but I worked it with a sense of urgency, my hands trembling from the intensity of the moment. The seconds were ticking away, and every second felt like an eternity. I twisted the dial, praying for the lock to give. The sound of the fire crackling behind me was deafening, but I couldn't let that distract me. And then, with a click, it opened. I barely had time to process the sound before I pulled the door open. Inside, I found a mess of papers, yellowed and brittle, the weight of years pressing down on them. But among the clutter, I saw something that made my heart race, a stack of documents, bank statements, contracts, and encrypted files, all carefully arranged. And then, beneath the papers, there it was, the smoking gun. A series of names, addresses, and connections that sent a chill down my spine. These weren't just random details, they were the proof I needed. Proof that he wasn't just after money. This was bigger. This was about power, manipulation, and betrayal. It was clear now. My son-in-law had been plotting this for months, maybe even years. The fire? That was just the final act in his plan. He had orchestrated everything, and I had been the pawn in his game. He thought he could eliminate me, use me as a scapegoat, and disappear with everything. But I wasn't just going to disappear. I wasn't going to be erased from the story. I stuffed the documents into my jacket as quickly as I could, my hands shaking with adrenaline. The fire roared louder, the cabin around me creaking and groaning under the pressure of the flames, but I couldn't stop. The truth was in my hands. I had to survive. I had to make it out. The door was locked. The windows were sealed tight. The fire was encroaching on all sides, but I knew I had one more option, the back window. I had seen it when I first entered, almost unnoticed in the chaos. It was small, but it was my only chance. I pushed through the burning cabin, my legs like lead, my chest tight with the effort of breathing through the smoke, but there was no time for hesitation. The fire was closing in. I reached the window and kicked at the frame. Glass shattered with a deafening crash, the shards flying in every direction, but I didn't stop. I climbed through, cutting my skin on the jagged edges of the broken glass, but I didn't care. The fire was still behind me, the heat pressing in, but I was free. I crawled through the opening, the cool night air rushing in like a lifesaver, and I didn't stop running. I didn't even know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't wait for him to come back and finish the job. I ran through the trees, my body bruised, battered, and covered in soot, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My son-in-law thought he had won. He thought the fire would destroy me, thought the money was his for the taking, but what he didn't realize was that I had something he could never steal. Asterisk, asterisk, the truth, asterisk, asterisk. By the time he returned, expecting to find nothing but ashes, he found me standing there, alive and holding the evidence in my hands. The shock on his face was almost comical, but I didn't laugh. There was no humor in this. The truth had already been set in motion, and he could no longer control it. He could no longer manipulate the situation to suit him. I had survived. He tried to smile, to brush it off, but it was too late. The papers in my hands told the story. The law would take over now. And as they arrested him, I felt the weight of everything I had just been through settle over me. The fire had burned everything around me, but it hadn't touched the truth. The truth was what mattered. And no matter how hard he tried to cover it up, it was out now. The fire may have taken everything else, but it couldn't take away the one thing he couldn't steal: justice. And with that, the battle was over. I had won. The sound of my son-in-law's footsteps faded into the distance, and for a moment, I was left alone in the suffocating silence of the cabin, the only noise the roar of the flames and the crackling of wood as it began to give way to the inferno. The air was thick with smoke, burning my lungs with every breath, and the heat was unbearable. I could feel the fire closing in, inching closer with every passing second. The walls, the beams, the furniture, they were all being consumed, and I knew I had very little time before the cabin was completely engulfed. But I also knew one thing for certain. Asterisk, asterisk, I wasn't going to die in here. Asterisk, asterisk, not like this. Not because of him. I could still feel the sting of betrayal fresh in my mind. My own son-in-law, the man who had been welcomed into our family, had locked me in this cabin, set it on fire, and walked away, thinking he could erase me and take everything for himself. The thought of how coldly he had planned this, how he had so easily dismissed me, sickened me to my core. But the fire, however fierce and threatening, was not my end. It was the beginning of something much more powerful. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I could hear the flames grow louder as they swallowed the cabin, but I didn't let fear take over. I didn't have time for fear. I had to act. I forced myself to move, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me, my body shaking with the smoke and the heat, but I refused to let myself collapse. I had been locked in here to die, but I had no intention of giving him that satisfaction. I could feel the blistering heat creeping closer with every passing second, but I searched the cabin with determination. There had to be something I could use. And that's when I saw it, tucked away in the far corner of the room, hidden behind a pile of old, dusty furniture, a safe. My heart raced as I approached it, though every step felt like it was dragging me down further into the suffocating air. But I had no choice. I had to reach it. That safe could be my key out. If there was any chance of finding anything that could help me, this was it. I rushed toward the safe, my movements slow and labored as the smoke stung my eyes and the heat made it harder to breathe. My hands trembled, my fingers slick with sweat, but I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I had to open it. The truth was inside. I could feel it. Whatever it was, whatever he had hidden in there, it was my lifeline. The dial on the safe was stiff, unyielding under my trembling hands, but I kept twisting it, willing it to open. Every second I spent on that safe felt like another second the fire was drawing closer, but I didn't stop. I couldn't afford to stop. And then, with a click, the lock released. My breath hitched in my chest. It opened. Inside the safe were piles of papers, old bank statements, contracts, and even encrypted files. But I wasn't looking for money. No, there was something much bigger at stake here. As I dug through the papers, I found the proof, the names, the addresses, the connections that were all part of my son-in-law's plan. The papers detailed his ties to criminal networks, his steps toward laundering the money, and his entire scheme to disappear with everything, asterisk, asterisk, everything that should have been ours, asterisk, asterisk. He had planned this meticulously, and the fire was just the final stage in his twisted plot to get away with it. I grabbed the papers, stuffing them into my jacket, trying to steady my breath, trying to fight off the panic that was creeping in. I couldn't let myself stop. I couldn't let him get away with it. The flames were getting worse now, the fire spreading so quickly that it seemed to be consuming the cabin at an alarming rate. The air was becoming thicker, more suffocating. The windows were sealed shut, and the door was locked. I looked around frantically, trying to find another way out. There had to be another way. There had to be something, anything that would allow me to escape, to survive. And then I remembered the small back window. I had barely noticed it when I first entered the cabin, but it was there. It was my only option. I stumbled toward the window, my heart racing as I heard the wood crack above me. The fire was close, the heat was unbearable, and I could feel the sweat pouring down my back, my body drenched in it. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. This was it. This was my chance. I reached the window and kicked at the frame, the glass shattering with a loud crash. The shards flew in all directions, cutting my hands and arms, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting through that window. I climbed through the broken frame, my body screaming in pain as I scraped myself on the glass, but I didn't stop. I wasn't going to stop, The fire was still behind me, the heat pressing on my back, but I was free. I had made it out. The fresh air hit my face like a slap, cool and refreshing, and I breathed in deeply, knowing I was alive. I was out. I had survived. I didn't stop running. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I had to get away from the cabin. I had to put distance between myself and the fire, and I had to make sure the evidence didn't burn with it. As I ran through the woods, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I knew one thing for sure. My son-in-law had made a mistake. A fatal one. He thought he could burn me, bury the truth, and walk away with everything. But he didn't realize one thing. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. By the time he returned, expecting to find my charred body in the ruins, he was met with an unexpected sight. There I was, standing in front of him, covered in soot and dirt, but alive. His face drained of color as he saw me, and for a moment, I thought I might actually see fear in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to survive. He tried to brush it off, tried to pretend everything was fine, but I knew better. I knew the truth, and now I had it in my hands. The papers, the documents, the evidence of his treachery, it was all there. He had no idea what he had just walked into. As I stood in front of him, holding the evidence, I didn't need to say a word. He could see the writing on the wall. The fire had consumed everything, but it hadn't burned the truth. And as he stood there, caught in the web of his own lies, I knew one thing for sure. Asterisk, asterisk, he would face the consequences of his actions. Asterisk, asterisk, it was only a matter of time before the law took over, and his twisted plan would unravel, piece by piece.